That's what I do. I make deals. There'll be some swapping. There'll be some changes in land.
This bilateral meeting is a bilateral meeting between one party in this two-party war, right? You need both countries to agree to a deal. This is a listening exercise for the president.
The first meeting will not work that out. Certain great things can be gained in the first. It's going to be a very important meeting, but it's setting the table for the second meeting.
The White House's expectations for President Trump's Friday summit with Vladimir Putin evolving over the week from this is an opportunity to make a deal to this is more of just a moment to feel out Putin. And the president speaking today with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders, their last chance to communicate their wishes ahead of Trump's sit down with Putin in Alaska. Zelensky emerging from that virtual call with this message.
Everything about Ukraine will be discussed with Ukraine. We have to get prepared for a three-sided format of the conversation. There should be a ceasefire first, then security guarantees, real security guarantees. And by the way, President Trump expressed his support for that.
And joining us now is Admiral James Stavridis, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Admiral, I'm always grateful to have you. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start right there with what Zelensky said about Trump supporting, according to Zelensky, security guarantees. We have not heard President Trump talk about that extensively in public ahead of this summit with Vladimir Putin. What do you make of that discrepancy?
Well, I certainly hope that President Zelensky is correctly conveying what President Trump told him, because if so, that's extremely encouraging. I think the interesting question, Kasie, is, okay, what would these security guarantees look like? The gold standard would be membership in NATO. That's not going to happen. But short of that, these security guarantees could be a guarantee of continuous flow of significant offensive weapons, a guarantee from the West of cyber protection, more intelligence, and above all, security guarantee could mean the use of economic tools to put more pressure on Putin and his economy. So let's hope President Trump goes into the meeting in a stern frame of mind. I've also seen quotes from the president in the last few hours saying there'll be serious consequences if Putin does not get to a deal, get to a ceasefire. So far, in the run-up to this meeting, I'm hearing the right things, at least at this moment.
And what do you make, sir, of how Putin has managed to use past meetings like this in terms of whether or not the resolve that you note that the president seems to be showing here ahead of this can hold in the face of a personal interaction with Putin?
That's the worry, of course, Kasie. And we all think back to the first Trump administration and that really unsettling press conference in Helsinki, where President Trump seemed to defer to Putin above the analysis of his own intelligence community. I truly hope that doesn't happen. I don't think it will. I think the President Trump who's going to show up is the President Trump who launched the strikes against Iran, the President Trump who launched the killing of Soleimani, the Iranian general. I think if President Trump takes a tough position with Russia, he'll be best served. And I'll finish with an old Russian military proverb, which is the Russians say, probe with a bayonet. If you encounter mush, keep going. If you encounter steel, withdraw. I think President Trump has a lot of cards to play here that ought to turn this one to a success for the United States and for Ukraine.
Really interesting way to think about it. Admiral, from a historical perspective, we've seen some commentators in the New York Times, for example, liken the summit to what we saw in 1945 at Yalta. They write this: Trump and Putin could decide each other's fates, echoing the Yalta summit. In 1945, the map of Europe was redrawn in Yalta without input from the affected countries. Ukraine and Europe fear a repeat in Alaska. Do you think this is fair? Do you see echoes here?
I do. And you can go back to World War I. At the end of World War I, You saw the map being redrawn at conferences in Versailles. President Wilson of the United States representing us at the time. It didn't turn out well, and you end up with the wrong lines drawn, and it leads to further conflict. I think the approach here, Kasie, is this bilateral meeting is fine, in my view, and I like the fact that we are effectively summoning Vladimir Putin to the United States. Good first meeting, bilateral. The next meeting, in my view, ought to be not bilateral and not trilateral. I think the next meeting ought to include the U.S., Ukraine, Russia, and the European Union. They're a significant part of how this is going to unfold. So I'd like to see the president try and expand the format to include the Europeans. He's certainly taking input from them right now. Having them at the table ultimately, I think, would be helpful.
So just to kind of dig into that a little bit, how do you think Zelensky would see that? Do you think he would prefer to have the Europeans at the table, or would he like to have a chance with just Putin and Trump?
I can't read his mind, but if I were advising him, I'd say, President Zelensky, the Europeans have been very strong supporters. They appear quite unified behind Ukraine, having, for example, Ursula von der Leyen, a very competent official, the head of the European Union. I know her well from her days as defense minister of Germany. She is a very tough-eyed negotiator herself. I'd love to see her there. The Ukrainians ought to push for that. Putin will undoubtedly push back on that. So the best we could possibly get to is the trilateral. But yes, Ukraine has to be at the table eventually. And that's what I just heard President Trump say as well.
Really interesting. All right, Admiral James Stavridis, so grateful to have you on the show today. Thanks very much for your perspective. See you soon, I hope.
Thanks, Case.